Let's sing the whole song. Let's sing the whole song.
That's good. Okay, so let's get back into talking about Bitcoin and what the hell it is. Last time we left off with just the process of currency, how it evolved over the past, like 300 years. Started with precious metals, then to paper notes that were backed by precious metals, then government notes that were backed by precious metals, and then finally the current money we have today, which is just a piece of paper. This is the difference between the old silver certificates and like the new dollar bills. You notice the old ones that said right here, we'll pay you the bearer on demand, $100. Literally, you went to a bank and handed it to them, or you went to the branch of the Federal Reserve, and they would hand you that much, $100 worth of either silver or gold, precious metal that it was backed by. Currently now, just $100. It's just a thing. It's just something we use to facilitate trade. And before, now it just says it's legal tender for all debts, public and private. Before, and is redeemable and lawful money at the United States Treasury and Federal Reserve Bank. This was after the 30s when FDR took us off the gold standard, but we were still kind of on the gold silver standard or bimetallic standard. So at that point you could only go to the Treasury or Federal Reserve branch, and you could get the money it was backed by. Now, Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies that are coming out, they're privately issued, they're completely digital, so it's not even paper anymore, and they're IOU nothings, just like the current fiat currency that the government releases. This is backed by nothing. It's just a way to facilitate trade and a unit account. Which really brings up the question, what is the value? And as a lot of people ask, well, what the hell is Bitcoin? It really is just a unit of account that that we use to facilitate the exchange of goods. There's no actual value to it. It doesn't have any intrinsic value. And unlike a banknote, it's not like a debt contract or liability. The bank doesn't have, there's no bank that has it that they have to pay you. It's issued by, and it's not issued by a business enterprise. So like Hayek said, we have a bunch of companies releasing currency. It's not even that. There's not backed by anything like fiat currency. It's transferable on its own decentralized payment network, which is what they call the blockchain. You hear them talk about that. It's like a giant ledger that is kept in the cloud that keeps track of who has what Bitcoin. It tracks the currency, so that's how they determine who has the money and how it gets transferred. And it's not yet widely accepted in payment. There's some food trucks in DC that accept it, but most businesses, pretty much all businesses, don't accept Bitcoin because it doesn't have a stable value yet. So it was launched back in 2009 as a hobby project for a bunch of computer nerds. It was supported by that community who was just interested in starting their own currency. Some of them don't trust the government, so there's a lot of libertarians or anarchists that are involved in this. They don't want any state involvement. So they're willing to jump in and try to create a currency that has nothing to do with the government. Now it's surrounded by some for-profit exchanges, so you can go to Bitstamp, Coinbase, places like that, to either pay Bitcoin or to track its value, stuff like that. And there's payment processors that also are for-profit. The original program was written by Satoshi Nakamoto, which is a pseudonym. No one knows who Satoshi is. He was the first, he wrote the white paper, which explained what it is, what Bitcoin is and how it functions. And he had the first block of Bitcoins issued to him. But no one knows who he is. One of the leading candidates is Nick Szabo, who was heavily involved in cryptocurrencies before Bitcoin came out. Again, this slide is primarily from Larry White. Szabo cited Larry White in the paper, so he always joked that he really hoped it was him, so he could have been cited by Satoshi. And Bitcoin's known for its outlandish personalities. If you know anything about it, you probably know the value spiked and then crashed, and that weird people like it. So for instance, here's a tweet from John McAfee, where he's saying a bunch of people reaching out to him claiming to be Satoshi, and he's going to slowly but surely narrow down who it is until he reveals who it is. Since this tweet, this was like less than a week ago, he said his legal team has suggested that he stop talking about Satoshi because he's on the run from the US government for not declaring the capital gains from his Bitcoin investments. So he's now like hiding out in like the Caribbean and some islands. And by revealing Satoshi, that would he would get called into court and they would extradite him like immediately. So in order to stay hidden and continue running for president, because he's running for president in exile. The dude's crazy. He's a fun follow, but he's obsessed with Bitcoin. This is just a bunch of the personalities and memes. McAfee also promised to eat part of his body on national television if the price of Bitcoin didn't reach $500,000 at the end of 2020. There's a lot of jokes about it. There's up here, there's two memes of the gentleman who held up a Buy Bitcoin sign at a Capitol Hill hearing. So 2 summers ago now. And here's a GIF of that. You notice that was me in the background that ducked my head out of the way. This is a story I love, and one of the reasons I want to talk about Bitcoin. So I was interning at the Cato Institute that summer, and the kid next to me, Christian, we were both interning in the Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives. He was obsessed with Bitcoin. He's like a greasy used car salesman trying to convince everyone to buy Bitcoin. And I didn't really know about it or really care about it before that. But we go to Humphrey Hawkins, where twice a year the Federal Reserve Chair testifies before Congress. This is in the House Financial Services Committee. We showed up about 4 to 5 hours early so we could be the first spot in line so we could sit behind Janet Yellen and get on national TV. And I'm like a hardcore fanboy about Janet Yellen, back when she was a Fed chair. So when I find out I'm first in line, I text my mom and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna be on the news today. Like, tune in to like CNBC. I was super excited. We're sitting there. I'm like taking notes. I'm just loving it because like I'm literally like 6 feet from her. Well, Christian is, I don't know, flamboyant and kind of clueless. He didn't realize Humphrey Hawkins was a big deal and people actually watched it. Because a lot of congressional hearings, like the stuff they do on flood insurance, like no one watches. So he thinks like, oh, I'm just going to hold it up and no one's gonna like see this. And he's like elbowing me throughout there and they're like, hey man, should I show this? Should I show this? And I'm super sarcastic, so I'm like, yeah, go ahead, whatever. No, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, dude, definitely do it. That's a great idea. Thinking that he's not that dumb, but he was. He holds it up right when she's being questioned about should the Federal Reserve be audited. So already every like anti-Fed conspiracy theorist is like watching this part because they want to bitch about Yellen. So they think he's holding it up as like a sign that the US dollar is going to collapse. So if you go on Reddit, under some Bitcoin subreddits, they thought that we were like Federal Reserve employees that knew the US dollar was going to crash. We were actually the center of conspiracy theories. Someone who I was in grad school with was interning for someone on the Hill. So she was in there watching me as I get kicked out, because we got kicked out like 20 minutes later. This blew up online. When CNBC originally cropped it, they cropped it so you couldn't see Christian's face. You just saw the Buy Bitcoin sign under my face. So the media thought I was the sign guy for like the first hour. I'm trying to think where to go from here. So he posted a picture online afterwards, after like it blew up and everyone was talking about it on the Bitcoin Reddit. He posted a picture of him like standing there with his Bitcoin like ID and the sign, and people donated him $20,000 worth of Bitcoin. A bunch of nerds did that. A couple people donated like a whole Bitcoin, which was worth like $2,500 at the time. But most people did like, $20, $50 because they thought the stuff was funny. Bitcoin went from about $2,500 to like $19,000 for Bitcoin. So he ended up making like 6 figures from that stunt, but then lost a bunch of it. But he's still up, I think he's up like 50 or 60K from that event. I was like shaking. I thought I was going to get fired from the Cato Institute, and I thought I was never going to be able to get a job at the Federal Reserve because of this. I feel like there's a part of the story on this. I don't know. Here, I'll show the video of it real quick.
Most people I know it's lack of transparency. Some people may not be, but I don't understand that. That's the reason I'm questioning you about it.
So are you sure that the Federal Reserve is one of the most transparent central banks in the world?
That's insane. What do you fear?
Yeah, so I was briefly famous for that. Oh, that's what I want. There's obviously like several articles written about it. Most of it was like, and with how goofy everything is going on, there's weird photo bombers. Fortune magazine in their online article called us doofus photo bombers and called us boyish. I'm still offended they called me boyish. They always said that it was the two of us that photobombed, but then they were clear once like Christian started making all that money that it was just him that was making the money. I didn't get to see any of it, unfortunately. But now I got a good story about the time I got kicked out of a Capitol Hill hearing on national TV.
Oh, you guys got kicked out?
Yeah. Because all these people were tweeting about it and writing articles about it.
Like, while it was happening?
Yeah, Jeb Hensarling's staffer, she was the parliamentarian of the subcommittee. She came over and kicked us out. And she was talking to Christian, like she was on this side, he was on this side, and I just stared straight ahead, like pretending I didn't hear, and maybe she'd think that wasn't me. It didn't work. All right, so to go through the history of Bitcoin, the idea started back in 1983 with David Chaum's DigiCash, and it was a project for issuing cryptocurrency, sort of like electronic currency. The idea comes from a little bit earlier than that. Milton Friedman was talking about the internet once during an interview, and he said, hey, like, the internet's really cool. We might be able to use this to issue some kind of currency or make the payment system easier. And the idea was kind of based upon that. And there was a thing called Hashcash, which they had a proof of work system that's basically similar to Bitcoin mining, to a way to verify these transactions to make sure that someone doesn't just, I don't know, hack into someone's account and steal Bitcoin from them, or I guess at this point, Hashcash from them. Way to try to secure the payment system. And then in early 2008, there were three similar type of cryptocurrencies to Bitcoin. Was it B-Money, BitGold, and RPow. And then finally, November 2008, Satoshi published the Bitcoin white paper. First time it was used to buy anything was in May 2010. Someone paid another guy 10,000 Bitcoin to buy 2 pizzas. So the first ever transaction, so the first time they actually had like a market price. In 2011, it hit 1 Bitcoin to $1. And today it's at like between $5,000 and $6,000. It was really cool when I was taking this class, was when Bitcoin was spiking. So like he literally had to update the slide like 5 different times that day, because it went from like 17, like the upper 17s to like the low 19s. So it's cool, and everyone's like talking about it, actually like learning about what's going on behind this. And this is the price a couple days ago. So you can see like the big spike. The day Christian got us kicked out of Capitol Hill was, I don't know, it was one of these, I think it was this one. He actually moved the market that day. There was a significant like increase, like a $300 increase in the price of Bitcoin that day. But as you can see from this, it's extremely volatile. Let's get these problems with it. So let's talk about the stability of value. Bitcoin is a pre-programmed rate of increase. So that's the thing of the money supply of Bitcoins. They say it's going to increase by a certain amount each day. So each time you verify a transaction, you get a certain amount of Bitcoin as like a reward for doing that. And that's how the new money enters the money supply. This is pre-programmed. It's going to happen at that pace no matter what, which is how they prevent the problem of hyperinflation. That they're able to commit to keeping the money supply stable by pre-programming this rate. The only way they could do it is if like 51% of people that own Bitcoin went in and decided to change the code. However, if they decide to change the code, then people would know that could happen any time, and they rationally wouldn't accept any Bitcoin, or at any point it can be devalued. So it's kind of like a suicide switch that they're on this on this rate and the rate of increase. The only way to get out of it is to like destroy the value of Bitcoin for good. So it gets rid of the problem that Hayek's currency had, where people could just make money by hyperinflating. However, the value fluctuates compared to the US dollar. So if a lot of people want a Bitcoin, they want to start paying in Bitcoin, the value is going to increase. If a bunch of people don't want Bitcoin, like over the past year, the value is going to decrease. Because goods are priced in US dollars and you pay for the inputs in US dollars, goods are going to be sold for US dollars, and the prices are going to be listed for US dollars. Even if a place does accept Bitcoin, that's going to be the secondary price. And it's going to be based off the value of the dollar, not off the value of Bitcoin. So the value of Bitcoin changes compared to the US dollar that day. You have to pay however much Bitcoin is worth that $1, or however much the money is. It's all based on the dollar, so it's very difficult to spend Bitcoin because you don't know. One day it might only cost 6 Bitcoin, the next day it might cost 8 Bitcoin because the value is constantly fluctuating. So that's the main problem with Bitcoin, and the detractors complain about it. I don't think they talk about this enough, is the fact that we don't have any sort of stability of value. So it makes it very difficult to use as a currency when you don't know how much it's going to be. Remember, one of the 3 aspects of currency is a store of value, and this is a terrible store of value. So this guy from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago said it has a quasi-monopoly in the realm of digital currencies, and has a first mover advantage because they were the first one, and they've got this brand name recognition. Even though it has a market share, it doesn't really have monopoly power because, remember, monopolies restrict their output in order to have higher prices. But Bitcoin, they can't restrict their output. It's pre-programmed. So even if they have so-called monopoly power, it's impossible for them to exploit it. And this other guy from UC Berkeley said that Bitcoin has to differentiate itself from the new cryptocurrencies that are emerging now and will continue to emerge, because the cost of production of them is incredibly small. However, the value of Bitcoin compared to other cryptocurrencies doesn't really matter. The value of the US dollar isn't negatively impacted by what's going on with other currencies. So say the Zimbabwean dollar, which hyperinflated not too long ago. The giant volume of Zimbabwe dollars didn't impact the US dollar at all. So how this differs from what Hayek and Klein in their private issue currency, which I know is very weird to think of because, our money is US dollars that come from the government. But in this case, there's no issuer that can take advantage of people, that can hyperinflate the currency, spend the new currency, and spend it at the old value, and then pump it out there and make it become basically worthless. And there's not only is there no issuer, but again, because of the pre-programmed rate, it's impossible to do. And transactions have to be validated by 51% of the miners before they can officially go through. So is Bitcoin's value a bubble? There's no ordinary commodity use for Bitcoin. There's no other use for it besides being some sort of cryptocurrency. You don't redeem it to get anything else of value. It's not tied to gold or tied to silver or tied to oxen, something like that. So it just has a positive exchange value because people wanted to use it for exchange because they saw it as an alternative to the fiat currency issued by governments. Okay, so yeah, well, that's the end of Bitcoin. Do you guys have any questions about how this works or really what it is? So basically, the reason it has value is because some people out there are willing to use it to buy things and are willing to trade US dollars to hold it. And then it can function between some people as currency, but most businesses don't accept it, so it's not really a currency yet. It's just an alternative.
So how do you get it?
So I bought a little bit of Bitcoin. I bought $50 worth. Basically because of the stunt. I wanted to just have some to make the joke funnier. I went to, I think I have it on here. Yeah, I went to Coinbase, and you put in like your credit card, your debit card, and you transfer them like $50, and they transfer you $50 worth of Bitcoin at that time. And then you hold it in like that wallet. They call it a wallet. It's like a digital like storage place. There's a bunch of other cryptocurrencies. There's like Ethereum, which has a really good blockchain. The state of Delaware like legalized it to be used for supply chains. So because the contracts like self-execute, you don't really need lawyers to handle a lot of it. They're kind of like written through the program itself. It's very useful for firms that want to manage their supply chain, so to buy raw materials from producers that they can use in production. There's several other ones, like Ethereum, Bitcoin. Like you can go to Coinbase and buy that. For other ones, you have to get Bitcoin or Ethereum, and then go to a separate exchange, and then trade those Bitcoin for the other type of cryptocurrency, like Dogecoin or other weird stuff. And there's a lot of them that are just BS. They're not really differentiated from the main couple cryptocurrencies. So they have very low market values. Very few people hold these coins, and they fold after not too long. But back in like the 1970s and 80s, when we had massive inflation in the Western world in general, but the United States specifically, and we're talking like 10% a year by the early 1980s. An alternative like cryptocurrency like this could have been really valuable as a way to prevent inflation from eating away your savings. If your parents like bought a house back in like the 80s or 90s, their interest rates were probably like 15-20%. You buy a house today, the rate on your mortgage is going to be like 5% because rates are so low and inflation's so low. So like at the time, or back then, something like this would have been a great alternative. Right now, there's no concerns about hyperinflation. There's no concerns about money supply going crazy. So people don't really need to hold this. They don't really want to hold this. It's just more complicated. The places where they actually might use Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is places that are hyperinflating. In Central and South America, there's been several hyperinflations over the past, like 3 decades. Larry White would tell stories about he'd go down a different country, the finance minister would call him and a couple other academics down from the United States. They're like, all right, how can we get our inflation under control? We're at like 1,000% a month. Normally what they did was either they tied their currency to the US dollar. So they just said one Bahamian dollar is worth $1 US. Basically get rid of their hyperinflation. Other countries just outright dollarized, where the US dollar became their currency that was used every day. So right now, Venezuela's in the middle of hyperinflation. It's very difficult for them to smuggle in US dollars, so they can't dollarize. And the government doesn't seem to want to peg to the US dollar, to make one Venezuelan currency, whatever it is, equal to $1 US. So a potential is that that they could adopt Bitcoin, start using Bitcoin, because even though its value isn't very stable, it's more stable than whatever Venezuela is using right now. So that's a potential for it to be used. And if it is used, or if it is adopted, you're going to see the value increase because there's a set number of Bitcoins out there. As more people want it, they're willing to obviously spend more money to get it. That's going to drive up the price. So if you had some Bitcoin now at a lower value, and then a country like adopts it, begins to use it as a currency, then the value is going to substantially increase. So that's why when people talk about it as like an investment mechanism, that's sort of what they're talking about. If it gets adopted and if it gets used, its value relative to the US dollar is going to increase. And that's how you get your capital gains from it. One of the reasons, besides getting to tell the joke about me getting kicked out of Capitol Hill, another reason why I want to talk about this is because I've heard a couple other things pitched in the past year as the next Bitcoin. Like, oh, if you missed out on this, here's another great new opportunity. So at the very least, I want you to have some background knowledge. So if you hear that, you can know, well, what the hell Bitcoin is, and maybe look at the new thing they're talking about and say, is this the same thing? Is it different? Is this just a scam? Because obviously, if you want to scam someone, you say, hey, get 1,000% return in a month. which, I don't know, Bitcoin had incredible growth over a month period. So it doesn't seem that outlandish to say, oh, yeah, get these insane returns for like nothing in a very short amount of time. Like, oh, it's been done before, okay. So now hopefully you have a little bit of an idea what it is. If someone brings it up to you, you can know.
So how does like a normal transaction work?
So it's like kind of like Apple Pay or like Google Pay or like I don't do those things, but to like pay people on your phone,
Makes sense.
you just so if you buy from one of the DC food trucks, I don't know, you pull up your Bitcoin wallet that has like a barcode scanner
So
thing.
Just like an app that.
Yeah, so you would have an app for that, like Coinbase or another one. You like hold on a thing and boop, it scans it and takes the money from you. And then a bunch of nerds with computers have them running constantly, and they verify the transaction. Goes out of your wallet and goes into that company's. You can also like type in someone's like wallet ID if you wanted to send me Bitcoin, I guess to bribe me for a better grade. You can do that and just type in my wallet number and send it over. So with that, we're done with talking about markets. So for the last like half of this class and the very beginning of next class, before we get to the review, I'm going to talk about some non-market decision making where we can use the tools of economics to understand what's going on. The first one I'm going to talk about is public choice theory. So basically, what public choice theory is it's studying political science using the economic way of thinking. So you're trying to understand group decision making in political settings. So you're talking about like voters, about special interest groups, about politicians, about bureaucrats, how the government makes decisions, and how individuals, how they decide to vote for those politicians. So you're trying to understand how these public policies come to be adopted, whether it's regulations put out by the government agencies, or whether it's politicians actually voting on these bills, and the influence of different institutions are on the political process. So whether, the difference between a democratic form of government versus, let's say like a Republican form of government versus a parliamentary form of government, which there are some differences between the two, versus like totalitarian governments and governments that are ruled by dictators. So, public choice theory, it typically assumes the self-interest of rational actors that are involved in political decision-making process. So, voters are self-interested and rational. Politicians are self-interested and rational. This isn't like pure altruism where they're trying to do what's best for society. They're still thinking of themselves just like someone in a market. Self-interest rational actor assumptions may be moderated in some settings, and we'll talk about, well, I don't know if we're going to talk about that, but when those do come into play, they lay it out clearly that if they're not acting rational, if they're not being self-interested. And remember, it's not all about money, it's about individuals, what's called utility, or what their like enjoyment, pleasure they get from an action. So while obviously a politician may want a bunch of money, they may also want to enact their political ideology. They may get some value from that. So they're still acting in their own self-interest by passing this bill that goes along with their ideology. It's just not, it's not pure like a dollar exchange for it. So the central idea of public choice is that everyone's modeled similarly. Early theories of public finance, how government spends their money and how basically how politicians get elected, assume that some people were purely altruistic, that they just wanted to do good, and that's not exactly the case. So we assume that voters, politicians, and bureaucrats are just like consumers and entrepreneurs, that they act in their own self-interest. So it doesn't necessarily mean greedy, but politicians still try to maximize the number of votes they get. They obviously want to keep winning elections. And that obviously doesn't mean they're evil. Obviously, you can't do any good if you don't win an election and can't vote on bills. So given these assumptions, public choice scholars logically work out the consequences for things like the electoral equilibrium, the behavior of bureaucracy, the political power of interest groups, and the differences between democracies and dictatorships, and the importance of constitutions. These ideas may seem obvious, if you've been taking this class and like focusing on individuals reacting to incentives and being self-interested. But back in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, this was a new idea and a more radical idea. Even today, it's common for economists when they're putting forward ideas, or for political scientists when they're putting forward ideas, to kind of forget this fact and to design policies that would only work if the government was benevolent and omniscient. So studying public choice can give us insights for what's going on in both democracies and in non-democracies. You can better understand the consequences of government behavior, such as why do some countries fail to grow? Why do some policies that work well in a place like the United States not work in other countries? So for instance, after the Iraq War, we tried to institute a democracy. Why has that been so successful in the United States for, 50 years of relative peace, while in Iraq it collapsed almost immediately? It can help us design better constitutions and to avoid what's known as the nirvana fallacy. So here's just a quick look at the players in public choice, the different groups of people. First, there's voters. Voters they seek government services, so your public goods. They seek things like roads, even things that aren't public goods, like public education. And they vote to express, I said vote to express emotions, but to vote or to express their support for certain policies or for certain results of policies. Even if a policy may not solve the actual problem they want to solve, as long as it's expressed in a way that this is a solution to the problem, voters will tend to vote for those people, those politicians, to signal that they want to solve those problems. Next is elected officials. These politicians, they seek to win office and then to remain in office, and they try to get votes from voters and support from interest groups. Bureaucrats, they seek to expand their budget and to gain promotions to move up the ranks within their bureaucracy. Just like anyone else in an organization, you work in a typical firm, what do you want? You want to get promoted, you want to make more money over time. Same thing for bureaucrats. They don't change because they walk into a government-owned building versus a privately owned building. And finally, there's interest groups. Interest groups, they seek to further, obviously, their own interest. Say steel workers, for example, trying to get a tariff passed on Chinese steel to protect their jobs and their production. And they're going to try to lobby politicians in order to get these bills or laws passed that support their goals. Now, the nirvana fallacy, which I mentioned, is rejecting a realistic solution because it doesn't meet the standards of an imaginary perfect solution. So an example is seatbelt laws. They could trap a person in a fire. They could trap a person in a car if there's an accident, say fire breaks out. Makes them worse off than if they weren't wearing a seatbelt, obviously. However, seatbelts save lives on average. Most people are better off from wearing seatbelts, the vast majority of people. No solution is perfect, but as I think it was Voltaire who said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Economists often commit the nirvana fallacy by comparing the imperfect markets, markets that don't have the perfect competition, that minimize average total cost and maximize efficiency. When it doesn't quite meet that the result of that perfect competition, they say it's a market failure and the government needs to step in to solve it. Public choice theory is like a rebuttal to this nirvana fallacy, to this idea. We have to compare the realistic market with the realistic government. Both of them have shortcomings. Both of them suffer from sometimes perverse incentives that prevent us from reaching like the best possible solution. So you have to compare the two of them and see which action is actually better. I should note there's some economists that are much smaller, but that commit the nirvana fallacy the other way. They say, oh, markets are always perfect, but look at all this government failure, therefore we need the market solution. Not always the case. We have to look at both being realistic. You can think of public choice as a theory of government failure to complement theory of market failure, to show that both are imperfect in the real world, both don't end up with the theoretical results that you would assume just looking on the chalkboard and assuming like, perfection with people. So now, let's look at voting. And the question I asked, does your vote actually count? Obviously, the chance of your vote changing an election is minuscule because a ton of people vote. So what are the odds the vote is split 50-50 and you're the exact vote to put it over the top? Also, once a politician gets elected, they don't have to honor their campaign promises. They could easily just ignore them, or blame the other party for obstructing them from being able to reach a campaign promise. And when you vote for a politician, you vote for a whole bundle of policies. Some people may have voted for Trump because of his stance on international trade and his belief in tariffs. Some people might have voted for him because he said he was going to nominate Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, and they were big Neil Gorsuch fans. Some people may have voted for him just because he wasn't a Democrat. Some might have because he was pro-military. There's a ton of different policies, so it's hard for these politicians to know why people, like which one policy people are voting for, or which ones they support and which ones they don't. So it makes it easier for them to ignore these promises once they do get elected. There's a link to a video of Gordon Tullock. I'm not going to show it because it's kind of long, but he talks about how he never votes because it's a waste of time and it's never going to change the outcome. He said the only way he would vote is if everyone else agreed with him, and so no one else showed up to the polls, so then his vote actually mattered. It's kind of ironic. So the fact that a lot of people do vote is kind of a puzzle for people that study public choice, because obviously they shouldn't. The cost of it far exceeds the benefits of voting and the likelihood of you actually having an impact. So there's some thoughts maybe people do it because of a sense of patriotic duty, that because they're an American, they should get out there and vote because that's what our ancestors fought and died for. Some people may do it because they see their vote as helping a politician get elected, giving them a so-called mandate to rule, to help them pass laws that are going to help people who are less fortunate than them. Some people do it as a signal of frustration. In the last election, I voted for a third-party candidate just to show how dissatisfied I was with the two major party candidates that were nominated, ran the election. So I wasted my vote, threw it away on Gary Johnson. If you guys watched the campaign, you would know that was definitely a wasted vote. So although people do vote, do they invest a lot of time and energy into what they're learning? Do you guys think that voters are, know enough about the issues to actually vote? That's the prediction of public choice that we're going to get into. Says that individuals are not going to know enough to be well-informed voters. Right here from Diane Ziegler is a survey that was given like 2010, asking people these questions about the government. It starts out like, how many people know the president serves for 4-year terms? 94% got that. It goes all the way down the bottom. Can you name one of your state senators? 28% of people got that. And they don't ask it on here, but they ask people how many branches of the U.S. government there are, or what are the 3 branches of the U.S. government. And usually about 30% of the people get that right. 70% don't know that we have 3 branches, or don't know that we have 3 branches. Some people say it's like the president, the House, and the Senate. In this case, this is like that. This is while Obama was president. Only 78% of people knew the name of the vice president. I'm assuming that's higher today after all the Joe Biden memes at the very end of his term. Probably more people know him. I somehow doubt that 78% of people know Mike Pence is the VP right now. So why is this? People are rationally ignorant. Who's your senator, your representative, your mayor? Do you guys know them all? I just found out yesterday that Altoona has a mayor. Wasn't sure how the government was run there. Because I saw a sign that said, like, re-elect this guy for mayor. Only reason why I was able to say that. But I don't know who the representative for our district is. In my defense, I did just move here like 8 months ago. But yeah, so a lot of people don't know all of these. And then how do these politicians, how do they vote on road construction, bank regulation, farm subsidies? Like, what policies that you support? A lot of people don't know those either. The average American spends more on taxes and regulations than on food, clothing, and transportation. You know, these are big expenses in people's lives. But they know much less about the price and the quality of government goods than they do about those food, clothing, and transportations. Can you imagine why that is? Why they don't have as much knowledge about these government goods? Yeah, they don't put the time into it because when you compare the quality of food, well, that's like the next line. When you compare like food prices, you compare two goods that you're about to buy, you're the one who directly benefits. You get all the benefit from that. If you compare candidate A's their road construction policy versus candidate B's road construction policy, you may get a slight benefit from a slightly better road. But unless one person wants to turn the road into just like, I don't know, sharp metal spikes, you're really not going to get much of a benefit from that. Plus, your vote's not going to decide the election anyway, odds are. So all that time you spend comparing what their policies are, what the difference between their road construction policies are, you're getting very little benefit. You're actually wasting your time doing that, unless you get some sort of enjoyment out of civics. So it doesn't pay to be informed about politics. So we end up with rational ignorance. It takes a lot of time to understand these issues, to read. It takes a decent amount of intellect, especially if you're reading through bills, because those are god-awful trying to read through legislation. So the question they asked, can democracy work well when voters are ignorant? What do you guys think? Can it actually work if people don't know what's going on?
Yes. Isn't that what you're trying to say just now? The voters are ignorant.
Yeah, I am saying voters are ignorant now.
I feel like
I mean, America hasn't collapsed yet.
what's
So,
the option then,
right.
other than a democracy?
Well, you can go direct democracy where people vote on everything. Then you can go, we have as a representative democracy, or republic, where we vote for people who then go to Congress and like do their job and vote on stuff.
Yeah.
You can go, although you can do like an oligarchy,
Yeah.
where you have a small case of people that are like in charge of the country. You can go to a monarchy, which I'm starting to think more and more has some like legitimacy.
No.
Well, the thing is, if you're passing on the rule of the country to your heirs, you're going to try to maximize the value of the country, not just in the short term, but in the long term. Because you want whatever child gets to inherit the throne, you want it to be as in as good a possible position for them. Obviously, there's tons of serious problems with that, with monarchies. But it does solve one solution of democracies, and then you don't need, dumb people making decisions. Yeah, so it still can work due to what's called the miracle of aggregation. So if voters know very little about politics and economics and don't even try to get informed, they can still come up with the best results. So vote for like the best politicians. So voters' errors are random, so that they tend to cancel out. So some are wrong to the right of what the policy is. Some are wrong to the left of what the policy is. If it tends to be random, so they could be on either side, either distance, they'll tend to cancel out. So basically, everyone that doesn't know what's going on, their votes cancel out and they don't matter. So if 90% of the country doesn't know what's going on, 10% of the country is well informed and able to vote. If those 90%, if their errors are random, they all cancel out, and then it's just based on the 10% who know, they're going to decide the election. So whoever is the support of the majority of the well-informed will win the election. It's called the miracle of aggregation. This is how a democracy can still pick the best leaders, even when people are not well-informed, as long as there is a small group of well-informed. However, this relies on an assumption that the errors are random around the truth. If there are systematic errors, if people continually are wrong to one side, if those 90% all believe the wrong thing, the same wrong thing, and vote for a candidate that supports that wrong thing, then you're going to get poor government performance. You're going to get poor, low quality elected officials. So it may not be true. It may be true. I'm guessing it's more true than not true, considering we're still around.
I think the the stupidest thing about like our voting system is the straight ticket, like voting straight ticket. I think that shouldn't be a thing where people can just go in, if they don't really care, just vote straight ticket, maybe that, not really question who they're voting for. Some people don't even know who they're voting for when they pick straight
You
ticket.
don't know a single name, they just know pick the R or the D.
And my friend said his grandma, like after she voted the one time, he was like, so who'd you vote for, Grandma? She's like, oh, I just voted straight ticket. He's like, why'd you do it, Grandma? He's like, oh, that's always what Grandpa wanted. It's like, he was like, what are you talking about, Grandma? Did you even know who you're voting for?
There are some merits to that, and that's the good thing about political parties. There's a lot of bad things about political parties. The one good thing is, with Republicans, you tend to know what you're getting. And with Democrats, you tend to know what you're getting. They build up, think like a business, they're building up brand capital over time. So you know they're generally going to support these types of policies. So you can, even if you're uninformed about local politicians, but you know, I don't know, who's running in the Senate race, you can vote for whichever senator you believe aligns with your policies and then not do any research on the rest, and then vote down the rest of the ticket and still somewhat know what's going on there. But again, there's some policies they could want to enact some crazy things that don't align with the party that you don't even know about if you're voting straight ticket. And I think it encourages people to not focus on each race. So you get them voting with pure ignorance. You're like, oh, that's funny. Oh, Grandpa wanted to vote for Republicans, so that's what I'm gonna do. So there are some good things to that, but there are a lot of drawbacks. Okay, so political campaigns, they tend to base their stuff on, I use the word hoopla, but on symbolism, on emotion, not substantive discussion of issues and proposed policies. So parties try to build brands, family values, tough on defense. There's one sign in town I saw the past couple of days coming in. I don't remember what they did. I don't think it was tough on crime. But they try to put these little phrases in like commercials to try to show people who they are. And it's very similar to like Coke and Pepsi trying to brand themselves. And the news media tends to entertain. This PowerPoint is from like 2010, but it's gotten even worse since then. So while they do need to tell people what's going on and give them some facts, they need to do it in an entertaining way and to make sure they get people to watch. So they're going to be biased towards reporting negative things because the old newspaper saying goes, if it bleeds, it leads. If you give people bad news, they're going to tune in a lot more than if you give them good news. So we tend to hear a lot of bad things that's going on in the world and not hearing about the good things. And a ton of people get their news from shows like The Daily Show, when the Colbert Report was still around. Like, people get their news from there. You can tell it's old because it's Jon Stewart. He was on The Daily Show. And this may be a good thing because at least some information is communicated. If they were literally just talking about which policy they liked, who watches C-SPAN? No one. So maybe there would be no information. Now at least there's some information out, even if it's not 100% accurate or complete information. At the very least, there's some information so people can make somewhat better decisions. An example of this is the sugar quota. The government restricts sugar imports. So the price of sugar is 3 to 4 times higher than the world price. The average American consumer of things like candy, soda, other things that use sugar, ends up paying a few $1 billion more each year than they would without the quota. When you aggregate that, that's a serious number. That's still a lot of money, like per consumer. So why would the government purposely harm sugar consumers, many of whom are voters? Don't you think that would make people less likely to vote for them? How many of you guys knew about the sugar quotas before this slide? So the cost of the sugar quota is spread over millions of consumers. A ton of Americans have to pay this. Even though it's billions of dollars, they're paying, say, hundreds of dollars a year. maybe like $1,000 a year. That's some serious money, but not huge. And you're not writing a check to the government or to Big Sugar, so you don't see it. But the benefits to the sugar quota are concentrated on the few sugar producers. They know exactly how much money they're making because of the sugar quotas, and they have strong incentives to support it. And this is the special interest. They're going to be willing to lobby politicians, to lobby the government, to keep these restrictions, like the sugar quota, in place so that they can have, to increase their profits. Meanwhile, people aren't really going to notice, and they're not going to organize. How much time and money are you going to spend to save $200 a year? If you're being perfectly rational, you're willing to spend $200 worth of time and money, however you value that time. That's not that much. And it's really tough to get people interested in things that only cost them $200, unless you can really tie something emotionally behind it. Like Big Sugar is reaching in your back pocket and stealing all your money. Vilify them, maybe you can get some people into it. So the sugar quota is a winning policy for politicians, because people that pay it don't care, and the people that get the benefit are willing to donate to their campaigns and to support them in their reelection. So in this case, the self-interest of politicians does not necessarily align with social interest. Those who are harmed or rationally ignorant, they don't have an incentive to oppose the policy or to learn about the policy, and they don't have incentive to work to try to rectify it because it costs too much money. It's not going to be worth it for them. Those who benefit are rationally informed. They know exactly how much money they're making, and they have strong incentive to continue to support the policy to make sure that they keep getting those profits. So the secret to political success is to concentrate benefits and diffuse costs. And this is from Mansur Olson's Logic of Collective Action. So if you concentrate benefits on these special interest groups, it'll ensure that they're going to vote for you. They're going to give you campaign donations and be well informed. Look at the elderly in the AARP and how they support and come out against candidates who talk about Social Security and Medicare. If a politician comes out and says we need to cut Medicare spending, cut Social Security because we can't afford it, because Social Security is going to be bankrupt in, anyone see that? 10 years? Or is it 15 years? I forget. It's come a lot sooner than we think. You say, we need to solve this problem. We need to save money on this. So we're going to need to reduce the amount of money people make, or maybe push back their retirement age 2 years. AARP is going to come out against that candidate, and they're going to bury them. And they're going to run all these campaigns to old people saying, hey, you can't vote for this guy. He wants to take money out of your pocket. Let's vote for candidate B. She wants to support. She wants to keep Social Security going and to help you out. Meanwhile, the costs of Social Security are spread out on the rest of the U.S. working population. They're paying the taxes that go into to make these transfer payments to the older people. That's not the best example because you get the line item on each paycheck and you see how much you pay for Social Security. And there's the idea that when you pay money into Social Security, you're going to get that money back later. But I wanted to highlight the way that interest groups like the AARP will support politicians that concentrate benefits on them and will oppose candidates that want to take away those benefits or even reduce them a little bit. When the costs are really diffuse, the public won't bother objecting and they won't even know about them usually. So another example is Import-Export Bank. About 12 people in America even know about this or even care. They provide loan guarantees to large-scale manufacturing producers. There's a joke that it's called Boeing's Bank because over 50% of their loan supports go to Boeing, the largest airline manufacturer. It's a way to support them. No one really knows about it because it doesn't cost you that much money. You're spending maybe $10, $15 on it a year. Basically, for the past decade, Veronique de Rugy from Mercatus has just been writing about it and railing against them, talking about how much of a waste of money it is, how they're supporting Boeing and several big companies that don't need the help. It's one thing if there's some kind of argument you can make if it's a small company. But for Boeing, they should have absolutely no problem getting funding from from banks or someone to support them exporting goods. There's also regulatory capture. I don't want to waste too much time on that, but that's when the industry being regulated is captured by the regulators. So for instance, the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, they were originally designed to regulate railroad prices because railroads have a monopoly in their lines. You can't have like multiple railroads laid next to each other. It's just a waste of money. So they end up having these natural monopolies between locations. Because of that, the federal government stepped in, created a regulatory agency to make sure that the fares they charged were reasonably priced. Well, what happened within a couple decades? It became all former railroad industry employees that are working for the ICC. Eventually, once interstate trucking became big, they were using Mack trucks to transport goods between places. The regulatory agency put all these difficult restrictions on them, made it very costly for trucks to ship goods in order to support the railroad industry. So what began as a way to regulate the railroad industry became a way to help the railroad industry. Another example is financial regulators. Who works in financial regulations? Who has the type of knowledge to understand how to regulate derivatives? People that have worked in the finance world for 20, 30 years. So there's a what's called revolving door between the private sector, these financial institutions, and between the financial regulators. There's a joke that they call the Treasury Department government sacks because it's full of former Goldman employees. They're done. And even like when I was in grad school and I was applying for bureaucracy jobs, a lot of people you talk to, they say that's the way to go. You work for a think tank or private sector for a while. You jump into government, you like get a raise and a promotion. Work there for a while, jump back in the private sector or think tank, get a raise and a promotion, and you go back and forth, moving up the ladder each time. It's a really good career path, but it leads to regulatory capture. You're regulating your friends, people you used to work for, and who you're going to go back and work for in the future. And all these small costs can add up. I wanted to put the picture of Ben Stiller from 90 Museum where he's like tied down with the miniature railroad thing in the West. I couldn't get a good picture of it, so I had to stick with this one. So rational ignorance was what we were talking about with the voters, where they don't understand what's going on. There's also the idea that voters are rationally irrational, which is a weird thing to think about. So politics removes the cost of expressing our ideas about ourselves. So for instance, voting on welfare. If you as a voter, you want to help poor people. You don't want them to be miserable and to live in filth. You want to help them out. You'll vote for someone who focuses on helping poor people. Even if the policies don't help poor people or are counterproductive, say like rent control, ends up increasing prices and decreasing supply in the long run. Still, because they're talking about how we need to help people for these things, people will vote for politicians that support policies that end up with the exact opposite result as their goal. Because they want to signal, they want to express the ideas that they want to help people. So we're more likely to be charitable when voting than when giving our own personal donations. So if you think about it, how much money you give to a certain charity or to donate to other people is much lower than what you would do if you're voting to give money to other people. Because you're voting with other people's money. You're pulling all the taxpayers' money together and then divvying out to people. So if you got to keep 100% of your paycheck and then you're giving out money on your own, it would be much lower than what you vote for. Okay, we'll skip that. So basically, if you hold these biases or in this case, it's bias. It's someone who doesn't trust the Chinese and wants tariffs, subsidies for local manufacturers in order to or support American manufacturing. If the biases don't affect his personal decisions, then in this example, that person can hold them at a low cost. It doesn't substantially affect them negatively, even though it may generate these bad political outcomes. So a ton of goods from like Walmart are made super cheap overseas. If this person, he keeps buying goods from Walmart, even though he believes in tariffs and these subsidies, he's not hurting himself. Although they're generating bad political outcomes, increasing tariffs, increasing costs of these goods for people. Very low costs for him because you're not getting substantial increases on these very cheap goods. So if the cost of holding these biases, these irrational opinions, if the cost of it is low on you, if it's not really negatively impacting you, then you're not going to overcome these biases. You're going to keep them because it's not worth it to change your mind. Yeah, so rational ignorance is why people don't know about the sugar quota. And then rational irrationality explains why if you try to explain to them that it's bad, they stop listening, they get frustrated, and they just say, oh, we need to support the American sugar farmers. When people kind of shut down and give that kind of like emotional response, that's rational irrationality. And because they don't face the full cost of holding those biases. So in the market, we typically get to choose one good at a time. But imagine if we didn't. You went to the grocery store and you could choose two of these bundles, Bundle D and Bundle R. And they've got all different types of food in them. And basically, instead of buying them all yourself, what you do is you go to a grocery store, you vote for them, and then everyone gets whatever bundle wins. If Bundle D wins, we can't say that consumers prefer eggs to bologna, which are two of the goods in there, or milk to bread, because it's a big bundle of good. You don't know which one people are voting for in particular. Just like with political candidates, there's a ton of policies they support. You don't know which one in particular they're supporting. So there's a lot of uncertainty here that's created by through the political process that we don't know what policies are being supported by people. You could put out some polls that can give you some information, but unlike the market where you know exactly how many people want this good, how many people want this good, you don't get that with politicians. Government tends to be short-sighted. Politicians can't sell their office. Just ask Rod Blagojevich about that. He tried to sell Obama's seat. Ended up like the third or fourth Illinois governor row that ended up in jail for corruption. Politician needs to be reelected, and a House Representative, that's every 2 years. So you've got to focus on benefits that voters are going to see now in the short term. And it's especially true where voters are unable to accurately evaluate the future costs and benefits. So these are things we see a lot in government, kicking the can down the road until the crisis hits. We knew Social Security was going to go bankrupt 40 years ago, but politicians still haven't solved it. Using deficit financing with either tax cuts or spending increases instead of balancing the budget. Political business cycles and inflation to juice the economy. Richard Nixon pressured and tried to blackmail and successfully got the Federal Reserve Chair to increase inflation before his election to decrease unemployment at the time. Made him look really good. Then inflation hits really bad right after the election, but it doesn't matter because he's in the office again. Although that didn't matter because of Watergate. He had to resign immediately afterwards. Rent controls. Short term, you're seeing lower cost of housing. Long term, you see a decrease in supply, and you end up with higher costs because they have an exception for luxury places, so everyone builds luxury apartments. And politicians also spend other people's money. The amount spent doesn't impact their profit like it would in a business. They're not bearing the full cost or very much of the cost of spending this money. More spending obviously makes voters better off. You can provide more services. The cost is spread across all voters, so they're not paying a ton of money for these things. This results in a tendency for government to overspend, spending more money than they would if they face the full cost of spending that money. Real quick, bureaucracy. The larger bureaucracies, the more opportunities there are for promotion, the more budget they can get. So Archer, there was a great joke in the season where I did Archer Vice. If you guys saw that, the CIA was trading drugs for arms, and then backing a rebel group in the Central American country, and also backing the dictator of the Central American country. And when I think it was Lana asked the CIA agent, like, why the hell are you guys doing this? He said, oh, like, we're doing this because if we don't spend the money this year, it goes away in the budget next year. That was like a joke, but that's what bureaucracies do. If they come in under budget one year, they're getting less money the next year, again, the amount they spent. So they're encouraged to spend all their money, even if it's on nothing. So when you hear, this agency spent $10,000 on lobster dinners this year, it's because they're trying to spend all the money they were given. They don't have an incentive to save this kind of money, like you get businesses that have that strict that they need to profit. If they operate at a loss, they have to go out of business. They have the strict budget constraint. An example Ludwig von Mises gave was the Catholic Church. He said it was the world's greatest bureaucracy. The Catholic Church, everywhere you go across the world, the Mass is the same. It's all the same parts, all the same prayers. Doctrine does not change over time. So there's no innovation, there's no advancement, there's no change. It's supposed to be the same in 1200 AD as it is now. And that's really how bureaucracies operate. Everyone operates under the same rules, the same laws. There's no discretion made for different individuals. You can't ascertain success based off the profit of a bureaucracy. So you have to base it off of adherence to procedure. Whatever the top of the bureaucracy, whatever they say is the proper procedure to use, the proper result, you have to adhere to procedure in order to get those results, and that's how you're evaluated. You can imagine their budget is like the profit for a firm. They seek to maximize that because they're not selling goods and services. They're not making any revenue, so it's just their budget, where their money comes from, like what they try to maximize. And they're biased towards observable outputs. So for instance, they're going to build a bridge rather than maintain it. And when they complain about the crumbling infrastructure in the United States, every single politician does. That's because it looks better to stand and cut a ribbon in front of a brand new bridge than it is to send out a crew to make some small repairs. So they're going to tend to do these big projects, these visible projects that help get them more recognition and are helpful to get them promoted, move up the bureaucracy. This is my last slide. So you have an interaction between the bureaucracy, between the legislature, and between interest groups. So here it shows the tobacco division of the Department of Agriculture. Interest groups are like the tobacco industry, and then the congressional subcommittee, the subcommittee, the House and Senate agricultural committees. Congress, they pass legislation affecting tobacco farmers. Their interest groups, they give campaign contributions and support to different politicians that support them or make the regulations less burdensome on them than on other groups. Spread the cost out. The bureaucracy and the politicians have to work together because the bureaucracy gets their budget approved by the legislature, and then the bureaucracy gives information, and they help put these regulations in place on the tobacco industry. So they have to work together. Bureaucracy has to effectively regulate these industries, make sure that the tobacco industry is adhering to the bills that Congress passed. That brings us to the end of public choice. So I'm going to get the